Adriana, I'll be late tonight. I won't come home. Her husband called. And when she decided to wash his shirt, she noticed something strange. Adriana didn't consider herself much of a beauty. Yes, at 38, she looked pretty decent, but she definitely wasn't the polished beauty that her husband now preferred. That Alexandra in the photo was nothing like her, slim, 15 years younger. It was time to admit that she, like an old version of a camp wife, had become outdated. Yes, she had helped him achieve his goals, helped him through a tough period in his life, but now it was time to say goodbye. Christopher had been hinting at this for a long time. But could it really be that their not so unhappy marriage would end in separation? She was asking herself this more and more often, hoping that this time, her husband wouldn't forget their wedding anniversary. At least, if he could send a message or call her to congratulate, then maybe she wouldn't leave. All these years, her husband worked a lot. But what good was it if she constantly tortured herself with jealousy? They had 2 apartments, not rich, but comfortable, well off, and yet they weren't happy. About 5 years ago, Adriana had lost a lot of weight. The doctor had said it would increase her chances of having a baby, so she tortured herself with diets and exercise, even though she hated it. As a result, she had transformed from a rather chubby blonde, weighing almost 200 pounds at a not-so-tall height, into a woman of average build, let's say. Christopher was pleased that she had become athletic and, as he put it, neat. But the honeymoon, let's be honest, hadn't started, she hadn't gotten pregnant, and the miracle hadn't happened. A few months ago, Adriana began gaining weight again. Something was slipping, and her once cute doll-like face with neat features seemed to be losing its sharpness. Even her huge gray eyes had become less expressive. And the second chin, as always, had lurked in the shadows, threatening to bring along a third one if this kept up. That's just Adriana's type. Her face shape is the first to go. Dark circles appear under her eyes. She didn't even have a particularly big belly, but with her large chest, she looked much fuller in any loose-fitting clothes than she actually was. Adriana sighed as she finished washing the dishes she used to prepare dinner, as always fresh and made from 3 dishes. Her husband wouldn't accept anything else. Christopher worked as a surgeon at a private clinic, and Adriana had taken on any job while her husband studied. Then her mother-in-law had become paralyzed. They didn't have money for a nurse, and Adriana couldn't bear to have someone else care for Christopher's mother, Cameron Anderson. She was an intelligent, delicate woman, and Adriana didn't want anyone to accidentally upset her, so she looked after her sick mother-in-law herself. Now, with her passing, Adriana was just a housewife. As they say, no cat, no children, no profession, it's like howling at the moon. And on top of that, her husband, a strict man with a highly developed critical mind, would always criticize her, no matter what she did. It was never right. He never directly said he loved her, even though sometimes he was affectionate. It seemed like he loved her, but it was never verbalized. And there was confirmation of his infidelities. How was she supposed to deal with that? Was Anthony right, and her husband was just pitying her? Why lie to her husband's friend, after all? What was his interest? She set the table at the right time, waiting for the sound of the key turning in the door, so she could put on her usual smile and greet her husband when he came home. No, she wasn't trying to earn his favor. Adriana still loved him, but that feeling had become painful. She kept trying to avoid another cutting remark. She could never do anything right, and no matter what, she couldn't please him. Half an hour passed, and her husband still hadn't come. Then Adriana dialed his number and spoke gently, without a trace of reproach. "Christopher, I'm waiting for you. When will you be home?" "Listen, Alexandra, I'm staying late tonight." I don't even know what to say. Her husband hesitated. She understood. His work was demanding. At any moment, his help might be needed by someone whose life depended on him. Moreover, her husband often felt like she was trying to control him, almost spying on him, even though the reality was the opposite. "All right, then. I'll wait for you, and then I'll just reheat everything. But send me a message a bit in advance," Adriana asked. "I probably won't be coming home tonight. You know, Anthony invited me to an event. He's having a good streak, and I can't refuse, Christopher said. Couldn't I have been invited too? We haven't gone anywhere lately. Or are you ashamed of me? I'm not as young or as slim as your colleagues' wives. Adriana was upset. Listen, what are you going on about? You talk too much with Anthony, and I don't know, maybe I'm jealous? So, I decided, no need to add fuel to the fire, Christopher said. It seemed like he was a bit angry with her. Outrageous. Maybe he's seeing someone else, and now he's coming up with excuses. Anthony hinted at that, Adriana thought. She remembered how recently her husband's friend vaguely hinted that she should be careful if Christopher suddenly acted out. Adriana had tried to clarify what he meant, but he hadn't said anything concrete. Actually, a long time ago, when they were younger, Anthony had proposed to her before Christopher. So, if he had been the one for her, she would have said yes back then. And now this absurdity, Christopher suspected that she liked his old friend, even though Adriana hadn't given any reason for it. Moreover, something seemed off. Her husband often asked Anthony to take her to the store or the country house. And it so happened that Anthony was a creative person and had some bad habits. Even though he sang at restaurants and corporate events, composed music, he still hadn't earned enough to buy his own apartment and constantly borrowed money from her husband without returning it. Adriana didn't mind. What she didn't like was that Christopher treated his friend like a personal servant, which seemed to offend Anthony. As they say, if you help, do it freely, not by humiliating people with petty tasks. It's one thing to pay for a friend's car repairs or ask him for something in exchange for money when you know he needs it, but it's another when her husband says he's helping Anthony without any charge, and then he's expected to serve him anytime, day or night. You know what? If you found someone, just say so. There's no need to come up with stupid excuses for not coming home on time, Adriana said to her husband. Let him not think she was some fool who hadn't noticed his hint that she had gotten fat and he was bored with her. Fine, call Anthony if you don't believe me. I'll be at his place in half an hour, Christopher replied. She didn't need to call Anthony, he rang her just 10 minutes later. He was saying something about how he really wanted to invite her, but Christopher was against it. She could hear women laughing in the background and the voices of drunk people. It sounded like some kind of party involving women. Probably all of them are cheerful and slim, Adriana bitterly thought. Just don't give me away, okay? You know, I'm not doing too well financially, so I have to adjust to your husband, said Anthony. Yes, of course. I didn't tell you that I saw you taking a picture of him with his mistress during a vacation he called a symposium, Adriana sighed. Well, he does still love you, in his own way, and life can be unpredictable. But just in case, you should think about a plan B. Do you understand what I mean? Anthony asked. Of course. An emergency exit in case Christopher gives me a kick in the back. She replied. Well, no need to be so harsh. Maybe things will still work out. You know, he's upset that you've gained weight again. Maybe you should pull yourself together. Lose weight? Although, if you had become my wife back then, I would have carried you around in my arms by now. Anthony occasionally hinted that there was a reason he was still single. Sometimes, he would directly say that it wasn't too late and they could start everything over. But the problem was that Adriana had always loved Christopher from the very first day. And while she appreciated Anthony's emotional support and the fact that he kept her informed about her husband's infidelities, she would never have lived with him. Anthony, all right, I have things to do. Call me sometimes, and don't worry, as we agreed, everything you told me about Christopher will remain a secret. Adriana said, hanging up the phone. Whether it was good or bad, Anthony remained a window into her husband's world. Christopher had always been a reserved person, and she knew almost nothing about him, but thanks to Anthony, she was often warned in time about her husband's affairs and what he disliked about her. For example, Christopher said that he was fine with her being unable to have children, lied that they were happy, and convinced her that they could adopt a child from an orphanage if they ever wanted one. But from Anthony, she learned the real truth. Her husband was devastated by her infertility, regretted marrying her, and hadn't divorced her only because she had supported him all his life and was always an honorable person. Don't even think about adopting a child from an orphanage. Christopher said that just for the sake of a good line. He has a phobia about orphans, thinks they have bad genes, and said he doesn't want to raise a potential criminal, Anthony confessed to her. Thanks. At least now I know what he really thinks, Adriana sighed. Sometimes, she honestly thought that maybe she had chosen the wrong person. Maybe if she had put the same effort into Anthony, he would have turned into a successful person. Of course, her love for Christopher would never have disappeared. But if loving him hurt so much, maybe it was better to just erase him from her memory. Or maybe mutual love wasn't meant for her at all. What if everything could have been so much better? Adriana mentally returned 20 years ago and was horrified how much time had passed. She had almost become part of her husband, and he barely noticed her. Back in school, Christopher had courted her, but Adriana hadn't paid him much attention. Who could like a boy who ran off with your school bag and emptied your textbooks, teasing you all the while? Christopher had already been stocky, decisive, and dark-haired. His brown eyes and stubborn forehead seemed to scream that this was the kind of person who would always do everything his way. But his friend Anthony was completely different, gentle, soft-spoken, light-haired, and green-eyed. He seemed to sneak through life, always trying to maintain good relations with others. In school, he hadn't shown any particular interest in Adriana, but she knew that Anthony and Christopher were friends. Even back then, their relationship was based on Christopher constantly looking after his friend. Anthony grew up in a large, not-so-well-off family. His parents hardly paid attention to him and his three sisters. They all bounced around from one grandparent to another, but even there they weren't really wanted. They were like balls on a field, kicked away, just wanting to get them out of their way. But Christopher grew up in a complete family, the only beloved child. His mother worked as a Russian language and literature teacher, and his father was in the military. Adriana could clearly see how Christopher's breakfasts secretly moved to his friend's house, and how he gave him his favorite toys, pretending they weren't that important to him. Maybe, noticing the boy's nobility, Adriana started falling in love with him. She herself had an unconventional family. Her mother had died giving birth to her, and her father raised her alone. Adriana's father had grown up in an orphanage and couldn't count on help from his parents, and her maternal grandparents hardly ever helped. According to them, Adriana reminded them too much of their late daughter. Besides, they didn't think her father was worthy of her. They would say, "Caroline married a poor orphan driver." No wonder it didn't last long, and then they would whisper, "The child will probably also be a bird of low flight. Adriana can barely manage in school." Meanwhile, her grandparents' faces always took on a mournful expression. They didn't hide the fact that they invested all their strength and money in their son and his children, while Adriana seemed like a byproduct, an unfortunate accident. Adriana wasn't a great student. Her father went on business trips to earn money, and she, so to speak, ran the household. "Is it hard for you, daughter?" When her father came back, he spent all his free time with her. They went to museums, theaters, zoos, read, and dreamed. Her father never scolded her and always emphasized that she was his treasure. "No, Dad, everything's fine. Just don't get married. The girls at school are telling such horror stories about stepmothers," Adriana would ask. "All right. We agreed, I keep my word," her father would reply. Adriana knew that he was seeing some woman, Catherine, and she seemed to have a child from a previous marriage, but Adriana didn't want to meet her. Sometimes, their neighbor Cameron Anderson would help. She was kind to Adriana. "Don't mind my Christopher's mischief, he's in love with you, that's why he's acting up. But really, he's a good boy. When he grows up, he'll definitely be a good man. Don't worry, Mrs. Anderson, he behaves no worse than the others, sometimes he even protects me," Adriana would reply. She always got straight A's in Russian and literature because Cameron helped her with homework in those subjects and gradually instilled a love of reading. When Adriana turned 19, her father got into an accident. She kept waiting for him to wake up from the coma, visiting him in the hospital, but he passed away. Cameron helped organize the funeral, even though Adriana had some savings. It was at that point that she truly grew closer to Christopher, and they began an affair. She was touched by how the young man supported her during the darkest time of her life, literally wiping her tears. Cameron, her future mother-in-law, was always ready to lend a hand. However, Anthony managed to propose to her first. He ambushed her with flowers outside the medical school she had enrolled in. Anthony wore a white shirt, his hair gelled back, looking like the star of a soap opera about a passionate macho. "Hi, Anthony. What are you doing here? Did Christopher ask you for something?" She had already grown used to the fact that her husband's friend was often his messenger for various tasks. "No, it's not about him. I'm here for you." The young man stepped confidently toward her and kissed her. Adriana pulled back, as if to say, "What are you doing? What a stupid joke." "I'm not joking," Anthony said, and confessed that he loved her and planned to marry her, to spend their lives together. Adriana blushed. She felt uncomfortable that her first kiss was stolen by someone she didn't even like. She had wanted to share her first kiss with Christopher, but he wasn't rushing things. Maybe he was being delicate, or maybe he wasn't interested in her. Adriana certainly didn't know at the time. More than anything, she wanted to slap Anthony. She felt disgusted and repelled while he stood there with ridiculous, out-of-place flowers in the dark, like a thief who suddenly snatched something he had no right to. Adriana understood it was foolish to get so upset over a kiss, but tears were already welling up in her eyes, and she didn't give him the slap. Somehow, she felt sorry for Anthony, who looked so downcast and guilty. It seemed like he realized that there was no hope for him. "Still," Adriana said, "Anthony, don't ever do that again. You may be a good person, but I don't love you." "Ha, you're waiting for Christopher to marry you?" the young man said angrily, grinning in a way she had never seen before, so unpleasant and vicious. "That's none of your business. Just leave now, and let's never talk about this again." She stepped away from him, turned, and walked in the opposite direction. Adriana didn't even know why she felt so repelled at that moment. He hadn't done anything that criminal. Then something incredible happened. As soon as Adriana stepped out of the light and onto the unlit path, Anthony jumped on her from behind, wrapping his arms around her. She struggled, but couldn't break free. "Fool, you're second-rate for him. But for me, you're a queen." With these words, Anthony began to grope her in an entirely inappropriate manner, squeezing so hard that she started to suffocate. "Help! Somebody help me!" Adriana screamed, overcoming her embarrassment. She was genuinely scared at that moment. "Hey, you! Leave her alone!" A man nearby heard the cry for help and was about to intervene. Anthony panicked and ran off, disappearing into the darkness. But when Adriana got home, the young man was already waiting by the entrance, apologizing. He said that something had come over him and that he would keep his feelings a secret. And that was when he first asked her not to tell Christopher. "No, you know what? That's too much," Adriana said resolutely. "I will tell him everything. But his mother will throw me out, and my parents drink. My father will cripple me when he's drunk. You know, my sisters are already in an orphanage, and I wasn't taken in just because I'm of legal age." Anthony wiped tears from his face, and to Adriana, they seemed like crocodile tears. But he kept explaining, saying that passion had taken over him, and he couldn't control himself. She still felt pity for him, but warned him, if anything like this ever happened again, she would tell Christopher everything. The next day, Christopher proposed to her and was surprised at how upset she seemed. Adriana wanted to tell him about the recent incident, but she kept her word. They married quickly. The wedding was modest, just for close family. Then, daily life began. Christopher was studying to be a doctor and had brilliant prospects. His father passed away, and his mother, after that, couldn't work due to health issues. It's all right, I'll drop out of school and get a job as a nurse. You continue studying, that's the only way we'll have a future, Adriana said to her husband. No, that's not going to happen. Christopher also took on side jobs, but money was always tight. Still, gradually, things began to improve. Adriana was planning to have a child, but she suffered a miscarriage early on, and the doctors told her that she would probably never conceive. Still, Adriana didn't give up. She tried, but it was all in vain. She felt sad, her husband became distant, and then her mother-in-law was paralyzed after a heart attack. So, Adriana's break was short-lived. As soon as her husband began working as a surgeon, earning more or less decently, his mother's health worsened. Cameron wrote to her with a note. Don't waste your youth. Put me in a nursing home. I have savings. But Adriana was a noble and decent person. She would never have done that. No, Mrs. Anderson. You've done so much for me, I will take care of you myself, and will use the savings for your treatment. They did everything possible to ease the suffering of her mother-in-law, and she lived for another 10 years, but never truly regained her health. Christopher was able to arrange for her surgery. They spent all their savings to ensure she received the best care, but the elderly woman's heart couldn't handle it. All they could do was console themselves with the thought that Cameron Anderson had felt their love and care until the end. They had done everything they could. That was the truth. After his mother's death, her husband was devastated with grief. That was when he went to that symposium, the one Anthony had mentioned. Adriana bitterly stared at photos of the tiny, slim brunette. How could she compare to her? Young, slender. There were other such instances, each one stabbing her heart with deep pain. Adriana never told Christopher anything. She decided there was nothing to discuss. If she decided to leave, she would do it. After all, she had her pre-marriage one-bedroom apartment. She wouldn't take any money from him, she would make her own way. Her husband constantly boasted about his earnings, saying, I work hard for you, I provide, and you're always dissatisfied. Doesn't he understand that I'm not with him for money? I just need love, attention, Adriana thought. But things only got worse. Her husband came home later and later, spoke coldly, tersely. Their intimate relationship had nearly stopped. The last time they were together was months ago, and before that, it was hard to remember. Of course, Adriana had let herself go, gained weight. Christopher liked young and slim women. But was this really the end? Sometimes, a terrifying thought crept into her mind. Maybe her husband was just with her out of habit, and there were no feelings left. And then she thought, it would be better if he were just heartless, to throw her away like an unwanted thing. It hurt even more knowing that he was staying with her out of pity. But didn't Adriana deserve something more? She reached for a handkerchief, cleared her throat, but the tears still choked her. She looked at the clock. It pointed to their wedding anniversary, without mercy, without doubt, and Christopher had again forgotten it, not even bothering to wish her, not coming home. He had made up an excuse, that's how much he despised her. Adriana took off her fancy dress and lay on the bed, and when her husband quietly called her, she pretended not to hear. Enough of enduring this torment. Tomorrow she would leave him, she would no longer wait. When her husband settled next to her and fell asleep, she quietly searched the nightstand. Maybe there was a gift or at least a note with warm words. No, there was nothing. She felt like a child who hadn't received anything from Santa Claus on Christmas. She had tried, she had behaved well. But not just for a year, for her whole life. Why was everything so unfair? A year ago, when Christopher had missed their wedding anniversary, she promised herself that if it happened again, that would be it. To make matters worse, her husband came home not just drunk, but with Anthony, and she heard them take food she had prepared from the fridge, laughing about something. It seemed they were amused by the fact that the caring wife hadn't noticed that she was no longer needed. Or maybe they were discussing the affair he had with yet another slim woman. The next morning, Adriana woke up at 5 a.m. Anthony had left in the middle of the night, and her husband was snoring in bed, since today was his day off. After making herself coffee, Adriana packed the most necessary things into a suitcase, as she had imagined a million times. She took a bit of money to get by in the beginning and moved into the room she had rented a week ago. Yes, she was prepared for the fact that her husband would wipe his feet on her again. She had secretly rented out her apartment and used that money to rent simpler accommodation. Adriana hoped she wouldn't need to use it. But Christopher's clothes clearly smelled of women's perfume, and there were lipstick marks on the collar. He had never allowed himself this before, and she had never found any proof. So, in her husband's eyes, she had clearly become just another doormat. A new SIM card was also ready. For a while, she wouldn't be in touch with anyone she knew. Adriana would just file for divorce. She quickly wrote a note. It wasn't fashionable, but she really wanted to. Christopher, you've missed our wedding day for the second year in a row and didn't even bother to wish me well. I also know everything about your symposium and about Alexandra. I know she's not the only one. The old wife did her job. She can leave. There will be no children from the orphanage, which you hate so much. Nothing more will happen. Goodbye forever. It's a shame that I loved you. I won't claim anything. You didn't buy me, and I didn't want your money, just you. Adriana. She left the SIM card right on the note, hoping he would understand that there was no point in calling anymore. Her heart was breaking. Adriana would give anything to avoid leaving. But if she stayed and continued living with this indifferent man, she would go mad from the torture, so the only option left was to leave with nothing. For about a week, Adriana stayed in her rented room, which had become her lair. The dormitory was full of women. She marveled at their resilience, at how they fought day by day for themselves and their children, battling poverty and despair. Her own problems with weight and her husband's indifference seemed trivial. After all, at least she had her own apartment. She couldn't return there yet, though, because Adriana wasn't ready for a conversation with her almost ex-husband. So she told the tenants to transfer the rent to her card because she was leaving for the other side of the country. She warned them not to give out her new phone number if anyone came looking for her, as she was going through a divorce. This all happened before she made her final decision, but Adriana already had a bad premonition. Hey, neighbor, something about your face doesn't look right. You're always lying in your room and never come out. Is something wrong? Asked Josefina, the mother of several children from the dormitory. Her husband had abandoned Josefina a year ago with 3 young children, and now she worked in a nearby cafe as a cleaner and dishwasher, glad when they let her take leftovers from the buffet home. Adriana felt very sorry for her and had offered help several times. She was still receiving some money from the rent, and the room cost less. She had also saved a bit, enough for at least 6 months, but Josefina refused. She suspected that Adriana had gone through some terrible tragedy and didn't want to take the last bit from her. In truth, Adriana had started over from scratch, with nothing, with no prospects. So Josefina wasn't far from the truth, except that Adriana wasn't at risk of starving to death. A life of poverty seemed possible, though, because she didn't have a profession or work experience. And all she had ahead of her was the prospect of lonely old age. It's not that bad. My husband betrayed me a few times, so now I have to start over. I'm not so young, and I don't have kids, Adriana sighed. This was the first time she had told anyone about it. I'm rich in children. But believe me, living like that is even scarier. Don't take men too seriously. My current husband, the minute something happens, he's already stuffed with pears. Josefina tried to cheer her up and told her that she once believed her husband would be her rock. But he went astray, decided to live happily, and now he was an alcoholic. Mine didn't drink, just went out, and you know, I don't even have my health. I've let myself go, and I'm not even 40 yet, and menopause has already hit me. At first, Adriana was put off by the fact that the neighbors addressed her informally, but then she realized that they didn't mean any harm, just being friendly, with the best of intentions. She was lucky to have them. Each one asked if she needed any help but didn't pry into her life too much. How did you come to the conclusion that it's menopause? Have you seen a doctor? Josephina asked. No, what's the point? A proper exam costs money, and I don't have any right now. I can tell what's going on, and I'm gaining weight, Adriana said. Christopher had suggested that it might be menopause and recommended an exam, but at the time, she got upset, thinking he was annoyed by her weight and hinting that she should get into shape. Could it be that you're pregnant? Josephina asked. No. The doctors told me a long time ago that I couldn't have children. We tried for years, but it didn't work. I wanted to adopt, but my husband was against it, Adriana replied. I see. Are you planning to get a job? Josephina asked. Yes, as a nurse. I tried it once when I was younger. I have experience. The pay is low, and the commute is far, but I'll manage. Adriana explained that the position would be available in a few weeks. You don't even need to wait. Our dishwasher went on maternity leave. If you want, we can replace her. And the job is right next to home, no need to commute. The pay is at least as good as for nurses, and you can even take food home. Josephina said. Adriana thought that maybe it was time to stop lying around in her room all day, thinking about a life that never came to be. She would earn some money and distract herself from her thoughts. She had to start a new life somehow. A vacant spot in her life would be filled with something else. And even if she never loved anyone again, that was okay. Adriana didn't intend to look for anyone to replace Christopher. All right, she would work and live. Day by day, and one day, she would die alone. It was sad, but not as suffocating as enduring the torture of constant dissatisfaction and infidelity. You know, Josephina, that sounds great. I'm in. But I don't have the skills, so I'll need some help, Adriana said. It's really not hard. Of course, I'll help. But we have some real troublemakers working here. They'll make fun of each other for any little reason. The boss started this habit. They call me stupid breeder with a trailer. They call my partner the mop. Cameron hides the fact that she recently had cancer. They might come up with a nickname for you too. Just ignore it. All the waiters are relatives of the owner, and the manager is his stepson, so they act like they're above everyone, explained Josephina. You know, it only hurts when those kinds of words come from loved ones, but from strangers, I can take it, Adriana replied. Then I'll talk to the management tomorrow. If everything's fine, you can start the day after tomorrow, her new acquaintance said. Thus, in a small town near the city she had lived in before, Adriana began a completely new life. They indeed gave her the nickname Fat Loner. The author was Philip, a waiter who had tried to flirt with her on almost her first day at work. Hey, blonde, sweet little muffin. I could just eat you up. With this simple compliment, the skinny redhead, about 40 years old, came to hug her. Slow down there. You must have confused the dishwasher with some other establishment. Adriana pushed him away. She knew that a jerk like him needed to be stopped right away. Oh, the fat loner is acting tough now. Have you even looked in the mirror, elephant? Philip said. The other waiters started laughing because Philip was the owner's nephew. It was rumored that the uncle had assigned him this job due to his bad behavior, as he was very inclined toward a carefree life. However, people were wary of Philip. Sooner or later, he would take over as manager, a position currently held by his father, the owner's brother. Adriana didn't care what they thought. She even started wearing bulky sweaters on purpose, making her appear even bigger. She was, in fact, gaining weight. So what? Now her appearance should only concern her, not anyone else. Still, Adriana decided to see a doctor to ask what she could do to at least slow down the weight gain. You should actually see a gynecologist, not me, said the female doctor. What's that got to do with anything? Adriana didn't understand. You have all the symptoms of pregnancy. Don't you realize that? The doctor asked, surprised. The doctor's words were confirmed. Adriana froze in shock. Was she about to have another miscarriage? She had barely survived the previous two, even talking to the lost babies. Why was this happening to her? Well, sweetheart, why are you jumping to conclusions? You're 3 months pregnant, and if there's been no miscarriage, everything might be fine. But try to avoid heavy lifting, the doctor said. What do I do? What, should I make up with Christopher? If the baby really comes out healthy, how am I going to manage on my own? I won't be able to work, and the rent from my apartment won't cover raising a child. Adriana had already filed for divorce from a distance, and this unexpected news once again divided her life into before and after. Still, she forced herself to call Christopher. There was a long beep on the other end. Then, unexpectedly, Anthony answered her husband's phone. Adriana? Where are you? What's going on? He asked urgently. I need to talk to Christopher. Where is he? Adriana asked. Oh, better not ask. This isn't a phone conversation. Let's meet in person. I need to prepare you for some changes in his life. Let's talk. Anthony suggested. Has something happened to Christopher? Adriana asked. He's getting married. Alexandra is expecting a child from him. Sorry, but he's happy, said Anthony, sighing sadly. Well, then I guess there's nothing more to discuss. Adriana hung up the phone, even though Anthony was still yelling about how they needed to talk. This only happens in movies. One wife marries another. But I'm a one-man woman. And even though Christopher is a scoundrel, I've given him my heart. So, I'll just keep going somehow. Adriana decided she would file for divorce and claim her share of the property. She had once been able to afford playing the noble game, but now it was no longer worth playing with fate. She would be responsible for the baby if it survived. She couldn't believe it. She was carrying a long-awaited child. And yet, she hadn't even realized it. She felt nothing and had believed it was an early onset of menopause. Christopher had suggested it, and she had believed him. Adriana had always had some hormonal disruptions, so she didn't think anything of it. The fact that she started running to the bathroom more often, she assumed, was just a sign of a cold, something that had happened before. Gaining weight didn't seem to mean anything. Sometimes, he visited her regardless of how much she ate. He just came when he wanted and left just as suddenly. It was time to head to her evening shift. Adriana hurried. As usual, a few vagrants were loitering by the back entrance of the cafe. Adriana and the other dishwashers would give them leftovers, but the waiters and manager always tried to chase them away. That was why they stood watch at the entrance, where the more compassionate part of the staff came into work. Adriana brought the vagrants the leftover food that the management allowed them to take, and they greedily accepted the offering. Only one new guy, barely 20 years old, stood silently by. Adriana even thought he might be mute and offered him the leftovers. Thank you, but I need some money. Is there any work? I don't ask for much, whatever you offer is fine. I need to get to a place. I'm just passing through. My name's Raymond, said the young man. Adriana sighed, unsure what to do. She decided that she was about to quit anyway and was going to claim her share of the property, so it wouldn't hurt to give Raymond her place. She waved her hand and quietly led him to the staff shower. I'll give you a work uniform. It's from someone who left suddenly. But don't tell anyone you're a vagrant, or both you and I will get in trouble. What should I say? The young man asked, looking at her with brown eyes, and Adriana flinched. He looked so much like Christopher, only much younger. What a coincidence. Just say whatever you want. For example, you're my fiancé and came to help. Of course, I'm old enough to be your mother, but in these times, people might actually believe it. I'll be honest with you, I'm about to quit, and if you do well, I might tell them you're not my fiancé, and you might get my position, explained Adriana. Okay, I'll do that, Raymond agreed. When the waiters arrived for the evening shift, they burst out laughing. The fat loner had gotten herself a young lover. Philip insulted Adriana more than anyone, unable to hold himself back. So, you're a pervert too. I thought you were a modest girl, eating at night and reading romance novels. But no, you have a hot young stud. Now it makes sense why you turned me down. Hey, hold on a second, what's your name? You red-haired idiot. She's my fiancée. And I'll beat you up. You think I came here for nothing? Adriana told me you're completely out of line. The young man, though skinny and young, was broad-shouldered, and it was clear he was serious. All right, kid. Take your Aunt Adriana. Who wants this elephant? Philip vanished with those words and tried not to show his face in the dishwashing area again. You shouldn't provoke him. Philip is very vengeful. It's unlikely you'll be able to stay here, Adriana sighed. It's all nonsense. I only need money for the bus. I'm looking for my father. And by the way, don't listen to Philip. You're really beautiful. It's strange that you're not married, said Raymond. Raymond helped her with the dishes, and she fed him and gave him tea. The young man explained that he had just graduated from the orphanage 6 months ago and had found his mother, who had abandoned him. She gave him a photo and an address for his father. Now he was planning to find him, as he had no one else. He had no money at all. His mother had been an alcoholic, living with some partner in his apartment, and Raymond had to travel from place to place, earning some money to get by. Now it's almost done. My father's in a neighboring town. Are you sure he'll be happy to see you? Adriana asked. No, of course not. He doesn't even know I exist. My mother said they had a short fling for a few days, and then he married someone else. So, she put me in an orphanage. At least she had me. Look, I even look like him. He's a surgeon. Raymond took out some photos cut from magazines, which he carefully kept in a plastic folder. Adriana gasped. One of the pictures was of her own husband. Her legs almost gave out. And with the swelling she had been experiencing lately, pregnancy wasn't going smoothly, and now this. What's wrong with you? The young man carefully picked her up. Just then, another waiter entered the kitchen and snickered. Already hugging? I thought Philip was lying. I don't even know where to start. Maybe you should first tell me how Christopher met your mother, Adriana asked. She couldn't just tell this kind young man that his father had always been a womanizer and was now marrying his mistress, who was expecting a child from him. And Adriana would soon have a brother, Raymond. Who knew how many children Christopher had fathered? She had believed that Anthony was exaggerating all those stories about her husband's affairs. Raymond said he didn't know much about the story. It seemed that his mother had worked as a cleaner in a dormitory for medical students, had taken an interest in one of them, and somehow ended up getting him drunk, and that's how it all started. She didn't even tell my father about me. At first, she wanted to get rid of me, but then she felt guilty and decided to keep me, thinking maybe I'd turn out like him and be something worthwhile. My mom had always been a woman who loved adventures and drinking, but she wasn't a bad person at heart. Raymond explained that his mother was about 5 years older than Christopher. He sighed and added that he wouldn't be sure if Christopher was really his father because his mom had had many affairs. But he looked so much like the man in the photo. Here's the deal, Raymond, I'll help you, give you some money, but you'll find out something for me too. Deal? After the shift, she took Raymond home. She couldn't just leave him on the streets. Luckily, no one saw her bringing him in early in the morning, or rumors would have spread. At home, she told him everything that had happened to her, including the fact that Christopher had indeed disappeared during the first few days of November in the year he supposedly had an affair with Raymond's mother. She remembered it clearly because it was on one of those days, when she didn't know where Christopher had gone, that Anthony had cornered her and proposed. She had still wondered where the guy who used to call her every day and visit her often had gone. Wait a second, did you say my father's friend is called Anthony? Raymond asked. Yes, Adriana didn't understand why this interested him so much. Do you understand? I don't know if it's true, but before she passed away, my mother told me she didn't choose my father herself. Some guy named Anthony bribed her, saying he was a friend of the student and that he liked her, while Christopher was just stringing her along. So, Anthony asked her to distract the student for a few days and even gave her money. I didn't want to tell this, not wanting to tarnish my mom's reputation, but since we're talking like this and meeting in such a strange way, maybe it's important, Raymond said. Adriana was stunned. Suddenly, it occurred to her that Anthony had been deliberately turning her against Christopher all this time. She knew he was slippery, but she had never asked her husband if his friend was telling the truth. What if Christopher wasn't even marrying anyone right now? Maybe Anthony had made the whole thing up? Here's the plan, Raymond, let's go to my husband and your father's workplace and find out the truth from the horse's mouth. I was going to ask you to find out everything. But how long can I keep running from reality? It's time to face it. I don't know what's real anymore and what's not, Adriana said. The tenants had just found a new place and moved out of her apartment a few days ago, so nothing stopped her from going back. The next day, Adriana and Raymond moved in. The young man called the hospital and learned that his father was working that day. He has a lunch break at 2 o'clock. He's always in the cafeteria then. We'll talk to him there, Adriana suggested. When she saw the back of her beloved husband, her heart leaped as though it were a rabbit caught in a trap, but she steadied herself and sat down opposite him. Raymond had already been asked to wait aside, she'd see him later. Adriana? So, are you happy with him? Her husband didn't seem surprised when she appeared and even added, I was wondering if you'd have the courage to say it to my face or if that note was all I deserved. You know, I carry it with me like a schoolboy. Funny, huh? He pulled out a piece of paper with printed letters. Adriana grew tense. She clearly remembered writing the farewell note by hand. She took the paper from him. Don't look for me, I'm with Anthony now, I've loved him for a long time, and don't expect me to leave you any property. Don't call me anymore. What is this? I don't understand. Adriana suddenly realized that she and Christopher had fallen into a big trap, and she told him that she had written a completely different note. Look, I even took a photo to remember. Adriana showed him the photo on her phone, and next to the note, Christopher saw a photo of himself, drunk and sleeping on a pillow with a red face. I don't understand what you're trying to say. Take whatever you want, and stop torturing me. Christopher jumped up and tried to leave, but suddenly, a young man who looked remarkably like him blocked his way. Listen, your wife hasn't cheated on you, but your friend is quite the crook. He seems to hate you. Also, Adriana is pregnant with your child. The young man somehow found the right words. Christopher stopped, looked at Adriana, saw her confused face and eyes that couldn't lie, and made the decision to listen to her carefully. The lunch break had just started, so there was plenty of time. And when Adriana explained everything, Christopher responded, But I didn't have a mistress. I really was at the symposium. But Anthony did show up there with some woman named Alexandra, and he took a picture of me with her. I didn't understand why she was looking at me so flirtatiously, but I couldn't refuse. Anthony explained he was planning to marry her. But why did you miss our wedding day 2 years in a row? And is it true you didn't want to adopt? Anthony said I was too fat and you were repulsed by me? Adriana asked. She realized that none of the things Anthony said about her husband could be trusted, and she decided to ask all the questions. Why? I wanted to adopt a child from the orphanage, but I was worried about your health problems with weight fluctuations. How could you think I didn't love you? Why would I live with you if I didn't? Christopher, usually brief with words, was unusually talkative this time. And about the wedding day, yes, I really forgot. I remembered only in the evening and left you a gift and a card on the nightstand. Didn't you like the earrings? Christopher asked. But there was nothing there. I really hoped. Is this happening again? Adriana remembered that Anthony had entered the room, supposedly to get a lighter. She was surprised, as it was improper to appear in the marital bedroom, especially when there were matches in the kitchen. She clearly remembered that he took a box from the nightstand, apologized, and left. He even seemed a bit scared when Adriana asked him what he needed. "But your shirt was covered in lipstick and smelled of perfume." Adriana recalled another grievance that led her to decide to separate. Yes, Anthony had an affair in the staff room with a lady, and he was planning to marry her. "He asked me to swap clothes. He wanted to explain it to you, but you were asleep," her husband explained. Step by step, Adriana and Christopher realized that they had always loved each other, but one envious and cunning person had been trying to steal their happiness all these years. "Adriana, now that you've figured everything out, tell me about me. I'm afraid my father will think it's too much for one day," said Raymond, who had been waiting at a distant table while they talked. He approached only now when they finally fell silent. "Father? But my child is still here." Christopher touched Adriana's belly. "This is my brother. And I've been born for a long time." Raymond sighed. Adriana then told this story too. Christopher grabbed his head and said he would ask a colleague to cover for him for a few days. He decided it would be dangerous to operate after everything he had just heard. Good thing Dennis returned from vacation a day early. "Just lucky, otherwise I wouldn't have found a replacement," Christopher said, taking his wife and son and heading home with them. Anthony knew nothing about the reconciliation between the couple. Like a patient hunter, he had been waiting for Adriana's call. He secretly set up call forwarding from all unknown numbers to his phone. His intuition told him she would want to go back to Christopher. The plan was simple: take advantage of the fact that Adriana was disappointed with her husband and propose to her. Most likely, the hurt wife would do it to spite her husband. After all, he had been setting traps all this time, hinting to Christopher that Adriana missed him and wanted more. He said she was irritated by her workaholic husband. Adriana had told him that Christopher worked a lot but cheated just as much. By now, she was supposed to believe that he truly had a double life. The evenings that Anthony often invited his friend to should have created additional chaos. And he subtly made Christopher feel jealous of him. He intentionally talked with Adriana about emotional subjects, and her husband took her smiles and lively expression as signs of interest in his friend, not understanding that she was just interested in talking about herself with anyone. Anthony himself wasn't sure if he loved Adriana. Perhaps to some extent, he did. But he hated Christopher much more. Christopher always made him feel poor and miserable. The more Christopher helped him, the stronger his jealousy grew. He knew his friend's main weakness, his love for his wife. If he took Adriana away from Christopher, his life would fall apart. Christopher had said this many times, saying that he loved his mother, but without Adriana, he would never have survived. It didn't matter to Christopher how she looked or whether she could have children, he just wanted her to be happy, ideally by his side. So Anthony decided to take the most valuable thing away. He would marry Adriana and then make her unhappy. If only, when he proposed to her, Adriana hadn't resisted so fiercely and called for help, Anthony would have shown her the photos of drunk Christopher in the arms of that maid. But her reaction made him hesitate to use that card. Yes, his plan was cruel. He was going to inject her with something that would make Adriana lose her ability to think, then take her to his friend's place, where they had already arranged things. He would say they had drunk a little and everything happened. Then he would show her the photos, and Adriana would remember nothing, feel guilty, and agree. But when she started shouting for help in the street, it ruined his plans, and he decided to ruin their lives slowly but surely. By an amazing coincidence, late at night, Adriana finished her shift and left with the young man who had caused such a stir. The next morning, Anthony came to her. It was like the excitement of suitors for the dishwasher's hand. "Excuse me, will Adriana be coming to work today?" In fact, Anthony knew the answer. He had already tracked the call and found out all about her current situation. When he arrived at the cafe with a bouquet of 101 roses, wearing a luxurious coat and calling a business-class car, everyone stared at him, and he had to say something. "Who are you? Another admirer of the fat girl?" The red-haired waiter was surprised. What do you mean another? Anthony didn't understand. Well, yesterday she was hugging some young guy. He washed all her dishes. He even wanted to punch me when I pointed out her immoral behavior, said Philip. Excuse me, I don't understand. You must be talking about some other Adriana? This is my fiancée. And yes, I'm going to propose to her, Anthony said pompously, showing a photo of Adriana on his phone. Yeah, that's her. I'm talking about her. Josefina, tell them I'm not lying. Here's her friend, they live in the same dorm. The redhead pointed at a thin, exhausted woman. What are you blabbering about? It's none of your business how anyone lives. We don't have to report Adriana's affairs to everyone. And by the way, she quit, and I took her resignation to the boss. Josefina didn't know what to think. She really had seen the young man staying overnight with the usually modest friend. She pretended not to notice, but technically, Philip wasn't lying. Still, Josefina wasn't planning to tell this sly, shifty-eyed man anything. Let Adriana say what she thought necessary. Women, as they say, have their own secrets. That's what Josefina told him. Anthony wasn't satisfied and ran to the manager. The manager confirmed that the dishwasher had indeed quit retroactively and then sternly added, "If you see her, tell her I won't pay her for the days she worked." "Did you lure her to that Eastern cafe or what?" asked the chubby manager. "Why the Eastern one?" Anthony couldn't understand. "Well, they take all the wedding orders. And you clearly look like a wedding host, otherwise, why would you dress up like that and walk around with a bouquet? Their style, they know how to lure people in, tricky devils. And by the way, our food is better." The man grumbled. "This is crazy. The only thing they haven't done is mistaken me for the wedding host." Anthony thought. He was proud of singing in restaurants and believed that soon someone would notice him and he'd end up on TV. Then his career would take off and he would get rich. Time passed and his dreams didn't come true. Due to his indulgent lifestyle, his voice had started to deteriorate. Anthony noticed that he was now singing the same way every time, but the hope of becoming famous and rich still didn't leave him. If Adriana married him and sued Christopher for money, it would really help him release his first album. Then he could throw her away when she was no longer needed. Christopher would realize that Anthony was much cooler, considering he'd stolen Adriana from him. He didn't know what to do next, so he decided to call his friend. Maybe he knew something. "Hey, Anthony. What's going on?" Christopher asked. "Oh, just wanted to apologize again for getting together with Adriana. It just happened that we fell in love with each other." Anthony decided to test him. "Oh, come on, no big deal. Wishing you happiness and long life. Just don't call me anymore, you understand? I'm not your friend anymore, and I won't help you," Christopher said. "Well, you're mad at me for nothing. I'm not to blame that she chased after me. I fought her off as best as I could, but I couldn't ignore her feelings," Anthony said boldly. "It's no big deal, I'll get over it. Take care," Christopher said and hung up. Anthony tried calling again later, but Christopher had apparently put him on his blacklist. So, he called from an unknown number, but as soon as Christopher heard his voice, he blocked him again. Anthony's days turned dark. He had no money to pay for his apartment, and his extravagant lifestyle hadn't allowed him to save anything. No one would lend him money, and there was no one like Christopher. Eventually, as the cafe manager had predicted, he ended up working as a host in an Eastern cafe because there, in the storage room, they let him live for free and provided food. That's where he ran into Christopher's colleague, who was passing through to visit his mother-in-law. "Ah, so this is where you're working now. I've been wondering why you stopped visiting Christopher," said Gerald, a bald, burly man with rosy cheeks. "Well, he's going through a tragedy. His wife ran away and disappeared, so I'm not eating much," Anthony said, trying to say something. Adriana had really disappeared from the radar. He even searched for her at her old apartment but couldn't find her. Josefina hadn't seen her since either. What are you talking about? Adriana had a healthy son. She and Christopher are having their second honeymoon. Apparently, there's another adult son who showed up. He asked me to help with genetic testing, and he was really happy when everything was confirmed. Gerald said, surprised, looking at Anthony like he was crazy, and moved away. Something was off with the guy. Anthony stayed sitting there with his mouth hanging open. And that same day, he ruined a wedding, saying some unpleasant things to the newlyweds and just boiling with anger. He was thrown out. He then decided to get a job as a dishwasher at the very restaurant where he had once searched for Adriana. Josefina was very surprised to see him there, but didn't say anything. She was planning to quit anyway. Adriana had allowed her to live in her apartment in the big city, and in exchange, she would help her with the child for extra payment. She also explained that Anthony was their lifelong enemy. But Josefina reasoned that this envious person had the right to earn a living, so she allowed him to work in her place. Especially since Philip had already come up with a nickname for him and called him the half-dead rat. Josefina agreed, for the first time, that this nickname actually suited him.